today. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We will plan on working some bills and having a couple of hearings. I'd like to turn our attention first to, first thing first, for those of you that were listening on the floor yesterday, I had a partial incorrect on certificates of convenience and necessity. Those used to apply to all motor carriers. Federal law deleted that term for all motor carriers except those who transport household goods, mainly because their rates are still regulated. Did not have that on the floor yesterday, and that's the best explanation that I've heard on it. Thank you, Tom Whitaker, for providing that to me. Makes more sense than what Insider Law says on their website. With that, we'll turn our attention to House Bill 2201. Adam, you want to give us a quick briefing on that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2201 is a similar bill to, I believe it was Senate Bill 116, dealing with a bill introduced by KDOT, dealing with the Eisenhower, kind of a trailer bill from the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. This bill contains some changes made in the House. The underlying bill would decrease the Legacy Transportation Program Alternative Delivery Project cost threshold. It would authorize the usage of federal stimulus funds for highway projects under the IKE program and would modify the bonds to be factored in determining the bonding cap. Quickly, Section 1 would allow KDOT to let phases currently prohibited under the IKE program before the completion of T-Works if federal funds were used. Section 2 would modify the type of bonds factored in determining which bonds would exceed the 18% bonding cap. Section 3 would lower the threshold for the Secretary to construct alternative delivery projects. Currently, that's set at $100 million. This bill would lower that threshold to $10 million. Section 4 contains just a small technical change. What the House did is in the underlying bill, the original introduced bill, there was a Section 2 was stricken in House Transportation Committee. That would have changed how the bonding, the 18% bonding cap would be configured. Essentially, the change under the bill that was stricken would have taken away a removal of using historical averages to either annually increase or decrease dealing with the revenues. That section was stricken from the bill. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Adam? Seeing none, thank you. We'll turn our attention to the first proponent, Lindsey Douglas. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Lindsey Douglas, Deputy Secretary at KDOT. I will be brief this morning. You heard KDOT's testimony on this bill previously. You made a change that would require legislative review of use of stimulus funds, and that passed the floor of the Senate 39-0. The difference between that bill and the one before you today is that they've removed the correction of how to calculate the 18% debt cap. During the committee hearing in the House, there was some confusion, and we tried to explain how to do that. I think that there was still some confusion over those provisions, so the decision was made to remove that by the committee. So today, we're in support of this version. We're in support of the Senate version. We'll leave it to your wisdom to determine which one is better. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Lindsey. Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Lindsey. What kind of problems does it cause you not having essentially I view it as a fairer way or more accurate way to calculate the debt cap? So that's not in this bill, as I hear.
That is correct. That is correct. So we originally requested that language to be adjusted with the varying amount of transfers that came out of the highway fund under T-Works. When those transfers increased, if we had bonded up to that cap, we actually violated that 18% cap because they took the transfer off of the total revenue percentage that is used to calculate 18%. So Right now, it's a net calculation, and we want to change it to gross. So that gives us a little bit more certainty as we're issuing bonds for, 20-year bonds, that we're making sure we're managing that under that 18% cap. The bond rating agencies use the gross calculation. So we are consistent with what the rating agencies would use. This was kind of an additional test that doesn't impact our rating.
I don't mean to ask you what their thinking was, but do you recall what their difficulty was in going along with the gross as opposed to the net?
They did ask if this would allow KDOT to bond more. Technically, the answer to that is yes. However, we only issue bonds for projects that can utilize those revenues. So we want to manage under that 18%, no matter what. And that was the original way that the debt cap was intended when we passed it under T-Works. The change to net kind of happened midstream during T-Works. So we're just going back to the way that it originally was intended.
Thank you. And I guess my question for you, Mr. Chairman, is depending on how we deal with this bill in this committee and on the floor, I certainly would like to see us be able to conference on this and see if we could get this into the more of the gross as opposed to the net. So expressing an opinion.
I think we heard and put out a good product earlier this year.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lindsey.
Committee, further questions? See none. Committee, note there are written testimony from Deborah Barnes, staff attorney with League of Municipalities, Michael White, executive director to KCA, Jason Watkins of the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Brett Litowski, chairman of the South Central Transportation Coalition. Are there any further proponents wishing to testify? Are there any neutrals? Any opponents? Committee will close the hearing on 2201. Committee, since we had heard 116 before, which is basically the same idea, I think we'll go ahead and work this while it's fresh in our mind. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we strike the contents of House Bill 2201, insert the contents of Senate Bill 116, and a substitute bill be passed.
Seconded by Senator Pyle. Motion by Senator Clay, seconded by Senator Pyle. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Bill's on its way to conference or to the floor. Committee will turn our attention to the hearing on Senate Bill 305. We turn our attention to the hearing on Senate Bill 305. Adam, can we get a description?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 305 would establish requirements for the collection, storage, and sharing of captured license plate data. Under the bill, would provide that law enforcement agencies may collect license plate data and access such data only for a law enforcement purposes as provided under the bill. The bill would prohibit the unauthorized use of the data. Law enforcement may contract to store and securely capture license plate data of such law enforcement agency. The law enforcement agency is required to maintain a detailed policy relating to the use and operations of an automated license plate recognition system. Searches of the system by law enforcement are required to have a legitimate, specific, and documented law enforcement purpose, and any violation would constitute a Class C non-person misdemeanor. And also captured data would be confidential and not subject to a court request. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adam? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Adam, where it says that the bill would knowingly make knowingly using, obtaining, or attempting to obtain captured license plate data. This is captured license plate data that that law enforcement has captured, correct? Because I know that there are systems out there that are private entities that can capture license plates, and I'm assuming that we're not making that illegal. It's just the captured license plate that the state or government agencies are capturing that would make it illegal to use. Is that correct?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, my reading of the bill, at least for, A1 refers to law enforcement agencies. Everything in the bill deals with law enforcement agencies. So I can't go through every sort of exclusion, thing like that, but my understanding of how the bill works is the bill would only apply to law enforcement agencies and their collection of the data.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam.
Any further questions for Adam? Seeing none, we'll turn our attention to the proponents. First up, we have Casey Slaughter, Wichita Police Department. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me this morning. Committee members, good morning. Bear with me for just a second. Okay, I'm Lieutenant Casey Slaughter with the Wichita Police Department, and I am currently assigned to the auto theft section as the auto theft section commander. We started our license plate reader program in the city of Wichita back in 2014 after going through the typical bid process that we would go through, demoing several different vendors and eventually deciding on one. I was appointed as the license plate reader administrator at that point, and I have been ever since then. Our plate reader system started as just simply 2 mobile units, and I'll explain the difference between mobile and fixed. Mobile obviously means that they're movable and they're on top or affixed on top of a police car, and they roam around the city and they're checking tags for alerts and stolen vehicles, human trafficking suspects, and then victims of kidnappings, things of that nature. Fixed systems are exactly kind of what they say. They're affixed to a pole or a traffic light, and they're generally not movable. However, there are vendors out there that are modular and have the ability to move those around if you need to. A couple of the big 3 things that I addressed when I wrote the license plate reader policy for the Wichita Police Department and that we stand behind is, and I guess I should take this off so you can hear me better. We stand behind our training, which I've outlined in section 1, C2, and C5 in the bill. And I should mention that I wrote pretty much the majority of this bill outside of what the revisers did and some of the small corrections, but the meat of it is mine. We stress policy, having a written policy governing the use of license plate data, and that's section 1C1 through 5. And then audits, checking and making sure that we're accountable as officers and we're not doing anything inappropriate or unauthorized. And that's in section 1C4. In drafting this proposed bill, I reviewed 16 different states worth of language. And I also spoke with and allowed input from 5 different chiefs of police and 1 sheriff of the Central County Sheriff. Our program for the city of Wichita is regarded as one of the models for how to run a license plate reader program in the nation by the Houston HIDA LPR director. HIDA stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. It's a federally funded program which allows law enforcement agencies different types of services. Related to license plate readers, they allow storage for free. So that's who we've been storing our collected data with since 2014. So what brought us here today is that we purchased our first fixed system, I believe it was around 2018. We went through a pretty long series of permitting processes and submitting of different schematics and things of that nature that are required. And we got our first permit. And this one was put up at 167th Street and Kellogg, which is US 400. It's on the west side of Wichita. No problems. We had no issues when we did this. As we started to move forward in the process, we eventually chose a second location, and I think that was kind of concurrent to the first location as well. And that was going to be at 45th Street, which borders Park City and I-135. And why we chose that particular location, it was an excellent choke point on the north side of Wichita. we had west covered, we had east covered by KTA, and we had south covered by KTA. The north side had nothing, so we chose 45th and I-135. As you go south, it can split off to US 250 or K254, and then K96 also, and I-135 in both directions. So we thought that was going to be a really good location. We were told by KDOT that they were no longer going to allow us to get a permit to have the license plate reader systems on any state-run highways. And the reason that I was given for that is there are no laws restricting the use or the availability of the data at all, which is true. There are no laws currently in Kansas talking about license plate readers. And then who is responsible for maintaining the readers? That's an easy answer I can give for this committee, and that's us. So anybody that puts up a license plate reader system is responsible in its entirety for every cost, storage cost, and every bit of data that's captured. There should be no responsibility on anybody else's shoulders unless you partner with another agency. Storage costs, there are none. I can assure you. We have two vendors that we're looking at. We have one that we've had since 2014, and we have another who we're currently doing a pilot program with, and we're going on about day 130 to 140, I think, with them. And we're looking to get a contract. How the different storage systems work is with the first vendor that we've had since 2014, Houston HIDA stores the data for free. So there are no storage costs there, and there will be none passed on to the state of Kansas. With the second vendor, they are on an annual subscription status, and so they host the data themselves. And again, we pay for that. There's no cost passed on to the state of Kansas. Wanted to bring your attention just to my testimony that I submitted, and there was a table that I found actually just yesterday, and it kind of surprised me, from the National Insurance Crime Bureau. And if you'll notice down on the table, number 6 is Topeka, Kansas. So Topeka, Kansas, kind of surprised me, is ranks number 6 and has 557 vehicles stolen per every 100,000 citizens. So to even make that list and being around this region is pretty alarming. And I can tell you, having personally been in a vehicle pursuit with a stolen vehicle that was stolen out of Topeka, there definitely are some issues, as we all have. And Wichita is definitely not immune to that. I want to talk about just briefly about some of the stats. I mean, obviously, I've got some of those written down here on the testimony that I submitted. But just going into some of the meat of the stats, 152 stolen vehicles recovered. This is over a 4.5-month time period. This is the current vendor that we are doing this pilot program with. So we're on, like I said, about day 130 or so, totaling over $1.5 million. Some people look at that and go, wow, that doesn't seem like that much. Well, here's the reason why that is an interesting figure, is because most people's cars that we recover are somewhere between the neighborhood of $2,000 and $10,000. They're not $50,000 cars that we generally find. Those are the exception, not the rule. So those 76 license plates that we've recovered are completely separate cases from the stolen cars. So the stolen cars and the license plates are totally separate, generally in those categories, separate vehicle stops. 156 arrests, they are majority of felony. 23 illegal or unlawfully carried guns have been seized, and large amounts of drugs. We recently identified an outlaw motorcycle gang in Wichita simply because of a license plate reader alert, and we know that there's a large gathering about to occur in Wichita. So we were able to gain some valuable intelligence on that. Quickly, I want to tell just a couple of very, very short stories, because I know we're pressed for time, of how license plate readers have helped us in Wichita. On 12/11/2020, a 20-year-old man was shot to death by an unknown suspect who witnesses described fleeing the area in a light blue Buick Rendezvous. Detectives analyzed police records and came up with a series of possible license plates and vehicles. ALPR was then searched, and a light blue Buick Rendezvous was documented in the area of the homicide within 10 minutes of the crime. Detectives used this information to locate the vehicle and the suspect, who was formerly charged with felony murder, robbery, and juvenile in possession of a firearm. On 12/25/20, a 911 call was received for an abduction/auto theft from 2001 South Oliver on a blue BMW with a 1-year-old child in the back seat. Witnesses and the victim stated a white Scion was used in concert with the auto theft, and the white Scion was identified using ALPR as it was seen leaving the area of the auto theft at that time. The blue BMW was located in the 2300 block of South Terrace, and the child was not harmed, thankfully. Because of the associated vehicle information gained from the ALPR, officers were able to locate the Scion and the driver who ultimately provided the identity to the suspect who stole the car, and he was charged and captured. On 1/4/21, officers used ALPR to locate a VW Passat that was taken in a residential robbery of an 82-year-old female. The victim stated 3 suspects forced their way into her home, knocked her to the floor, and caused her injuries. The suspects took her money, wallet, purse, cell phone, and other items before leaving in her vehicle. Officers got a timely ALPR alert. They located the vehicle, and 4 suspects were taken into custody. Suspects were interviewed by detectives. 1 suspect confessed and implicated the other 3. In all, 3 suspects were booked for robbery. They were later formally charged for ag burglary, robbery, felony, theft, and battery. This next one's a little bit longer. I'm going to not bore you with the details, but I will tell you that the burglary section recently captured a suspect based on 1 license plate reader hit, or alert, I should say, and was able to get 30 out of 33 burglary cases charged, and 70 of 74 charges 50 felony and 20 misdemeanor. Those are some pretty staggering numbers because of a single license plate reader alert. Some of the concerns that I've had in not having license plate reader legislation, which I hope I have addressed in the bill, is commercial data collection and dissemination. So certainly, based on this bill, and to address your question, Senator Pittman, commercial data collection would not be authorized under this in terms of dissemination by law enforcement. We do have private individuals, tow companies, financial institutions, folks that work for private entities who drive around making small amounts of money to simply just gather people's tags. We would not be able to disseminate any of that information or use it for a commercial purpose. Core requests. This was another big issue. Can someone with their, look for their, or search for their ex-girlfriend or ex-husband or do something illegitimate or improper? The answer is possibly now without legislation in place precluding the release of license plate reader data under CORA. So I've addressed that in section 1F, and on the previous one under data collection, I addressed that in section 1A2. I forgot to mention that. And then one of the amendments I'd like to make to my own bill, possibly, is we forgot to mention anything about physical locations of ALPR technology. So we certainly don't want the bad guys out there knowing exactly where the license plate readers are, simply because they would just drive around them and avoid them and commit their crime anyway. So we would like to see that exempted, if possible, under the CORA law. And then I'll leave you with some pros. All these are is force multipliers. I can have one of my officers or detectives stand out at the corner of an intersection, writing down tags and using their camera to take photographs of the back of the car. It's extremely inefficient and it's slow, and I can use it and put it all together in an Excel spreadsheet, but it's going to take time. These do that in a matter of seconds, and we're able to get alerts almost immediately when bad guys or gals pass those license plate readers and they have an alert on their vehicle. Objective evidence. So all these gather is objective evidence. They're not gathering personally identifying information about people. They're not gathering names, social security numbers, phone numbers, and addresses. They're simply gathering plates and pictures of vehicles that we can search for at a later time if historically we find out that there is some kind of crime that's been committed. And there are no live feeds. So this is not video surveillance that's going on through license plate readers. These are still photos that are being taken. With that, I believe I will conclude my testimony, and I appreciate your time.
Committee questions for Mr. Slaughter? Senator Hawk.
I do have one question for you, Mr. Chairman, before I ask my, are we going to have opponent testimony today? I don't see that on our sheet.
Yes, we will. We have opponent testimony from the ACLU. It's listed and he's in the room.
I saw that, and so I'll want to hear that. So I'll ask that, and it may come up in opponent testimony. So how do you know, I assume the vendor, if you get these kinds of alerts within a few minutes from one of the fixed systems, and they alert you, and you know that vehicle or the occupant has been involved in a potential crime, how do you know the vendor is keeping that information and other information confidential? Because I assume they have some kind of a program that scrubs that data and can notify you. You don't have to go through and look at thousands of tags and then decide within 10 minutes that that's a potential bad guy.
That's correct, Senator. So usually it's a matter of seconds that it'll notify us so that we can get units moving in that direction to try to apprehend. We have MOUs and contracts in place with any vendor that we would select, in which they stipulate all information is encrypted. And I believe I also have addressed that in the bill. I can't tell you the section at this juncture. I think it might be on the first page. But the data is captured and collected at various levels of retention, depending on which vendor you go with. And it's kept securely either in a cloud or in a storage facility in the case of Houston HIDA.
And if perchance that vendor would get hacked or somehow violate that MOU, what kind of provisions do you have as Wichita Police Department to take action against that vendor?
So I'd have to defer to law on that for the Wichita Police Department to give you that answer. At this point, at least, we haven't had that happen, and that's not been an issue. And we don't manage any of that data. We can access the data, but they completely manage it on their end, depending on, again, which vendor you go through.
And then would you ever potentially use this data you collect? I hear you saying you're using it if, say, a vehicle has been reported stolen or you have some reasonable, but in case of a protest or something like that where you're potentially collecting information on out-of-state people that may be in Wichita, is there potential for that to happen?
So I added a provision in there initially in the bill that I submitted, and after having consulted with several different people much smarter than I, they suggested going ahead and taking that provision out, but I've still got the language for that if that becomes a concern on law enforcement not being able to be at a otherwise lawful function, such as a protest. I think the concern on that, Senator, was that if we had intelligence on, again, like an outlaw motorcycle gang meeting, we might want to be able to provide either perimeter security, because maybe it turns into something like a riot, or we have intelligence that there's going to be problems. We would want that ability to be able to monitor that area if we needed to.
And you said you took that piece out of the bill, which, and I'm a little confused, would allow that or prohibit that?
It would have completely prohibited all license plate reader usages the way I had it written from any otherwise lawful gathering or protest or what do you call it? I got the word riot in my head, but protest, we'll go with that. So any otherwise lawful event, it would have completely precluded us from being there. And again, the issue was, what if we had legitimate security concerns about either somebody trying to attack their way in or an incident starting within. If I wrote it where it was just totally black and white, we couldn't be there whatsoever, then we wouldn't be able to provide any kind of, or gather any kind of information about this.
I appreciate your answer on that. Does our reviser have that wording? Or if not, I certainly would appreciate having you send that to me. I'm not sure I want to do anything with it, but
I will absolutely get that to you, sir.
I would appreciate being able to think about that.
Absolutely. I do have the wording, and I will get that to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Officer Slaughter, for being here. And I can absolutely see this as a force multiplier. I mean, my gosh, if we have an Amber Alert out there and we have license plates being reviewed and we have all the eyes and ears out there, but this thing can automatically do that. And I can see the absolute use for it. I do have some concerns, obviously, of monitoring. Kansas citizens don't like being monitored by domestic surveillance systems. We found that out when the Secretary of Health decided to use commercial data to track COVID kind of places, right? And we've heard the outcry from our citizens that said, hey, we don't want that. So I think there are concerns out there about privacy, as you know, and you've probably hit up against, we don't want lawful citizens who might be in otherwise, maybe they're troubled areas, but they might be targeted just because they happen to be in the area, and folks start tagging along because they can see exactly where they're at. And so there are those concerns, as you know, right?
100%, it's a valid concern. If I can answer.
Absolutely.
There's four things that I would respond to that with, and that is, again, robust policy that must be had by every agency governing what we can and can't do. So at this point, we're looking to self-limit in this way, and I'm looking to restrict law enforcement's activities so that it's not just carte blanche. And then a good training program that shows people what you can and can't do so that they just aren't, searching in the dark. Searching for a legitimate law enforcement purpose, and that's one thing I did forget to mention in my testimony, is that when you search for a vehicle and you know it's related to some kind of a crime, whichever way you decide to search for it, it records everything you do. Every keystroke that you do is recorded on that system, and you must put a valid search reason into that box, which is usually a case number. If it's a crime just occurred, then it may not be a case number. It's probably going to be a location and a type of crime. So a burglary at 100 South Main, something like that. We're going to put that down there until we have a case number. And then audits. So going back in and randomly auditing, having scheduled audits as well, and making sure that our officers are not doing anything for any kind of unlawful purpose. Thank you, sir.
Committee, further questions? Senator Cluse.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Use the term lawful event, so like a lawful public event you were talking about, a riot or something. How does that work, like on a private outdoor event that's in a public area? I mean, can they just go to any private outdoor public event, like concert that's held in a public area and track, or do you guys have to have a reason to go there?
So mobile systems, Senator, can go, they're allowed to go and drive in any area that's publicly available. So the same as you or I could go and walk up and take a picture if we really wanted to, if we were in a public lawful area. So if we're allowed to drive up in a drive of say a business, a public business, we can gather those and capture those tags. Again, it comes back to, though, what are we allowed to search for? We can't just search for Senator Cluse just because. We have to have a legitimate law enforcement purpose, and I made sure I stated that a few times, I think, in this bill, the proposed bill. Because we want to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable and our officers accountable to what they're doing and when they drive into any area. I'll give you another example. We might have a known gang meeting that's going to occur in Wichita, and this is something that happens probably a little too frequently. And we want to drive straight down the street for officer safety reasons and get those tags as fast as we can and drive away. And then go back and look and say, hey, who is attending this known gang meeting based on the intelligence that we have? And are we going to have any problems based on that? Sir.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee.
Next up, we have neutral from Eric Sartorius. He is going to get his written copy to us afterwards.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sorry, this was a very late-moving bill, and so we are neutral. The concept, certainly the cameras themselves have as Lieutenant said, had very beneficial results in uses of them. We're neutral because we don't know enough about this bill. I've heard that this has been being discussed and talked about for weeks. My understanding is most of this arises because KDOT is concerned about the cameras being placed on interstates and state highways on their property, and they understandably want some agreement as to how the data is used, and they want to make sure they're not responsible for open records requests. And so when it comes down to an issue that sounds like it's about KDOT and it's about city-owned equipment, it's curious to me that those are two parties that were not involved in any of this. Nobody asked cities about any of this. Nobody asked KDOT about any of this. It popped up. It's suddenly being heard. No legal review from cities has been done on this, to my knowledge. I've checked with several cities. Some cities that were actually identified in the testimony have said, we don't think this legislation is needed. All you need is an agreement with KDOT and the city saying the city is responsible for maintaining this equipment. The city is responsible for addressing CORA requests, and it could be simply done. From what I've gathered, as I said, this stems from some policy decisions that KDOT is making that could be easily resolved just between cities. So again, at this late hour, I don't know enough about this. We've had cities already asking me questions. Well, what if this vendor's out of state? How do we force an out-of-state vendor to comply with Kansas law? How do we ensure that the data is being sustained in a retrievable format? Several cities, Topeka, I think, may have offered testimony. They have policies in place in terms of records retention. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess what I'm getting at, there's now an informational hearing on this in the House Transportation this afternoon. So it's really curious to us as to how this became such an emergency, why it is such a fast-moving train, and why the parties that are apparently involved in all of it aren't involved in all of it. So I guess, in general, I would just caution, don't be in a hurry. I'd like to still be able to get feedback from cities as to what this means for them and why this came out of the blue. And I'll stand for questions.
Quick answer to your question is there was folks talking about this a couple weeks ago. It's been hung up in the revisers. It came out. They thought they needed moving forward. People were very concerned that this data was being stored. It is being collected now as we speak, probably. Making sure that it's being stored in an encrypted format to where it can't be taken and there's no commercial use of it. That is just the issue that why it's coming out quickly. But with that, further questions for Eric? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. I can't thank the bill being brought before us in a more expedient manner. Our privacy is such an issue, and it is treated with not the respect that it deserves. So I just appreciate the chairman and everybody that has brought this bill and expedited it. I understand your concerns, but we absolutely need to protect privacy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, ma'am.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, you know, we did have neutral written testimony from Herman Jones of the Kansas Highway Patrol. And in the further neutral testimony, seeing none, we'll turn our attention to the opponents. We have Kendall Seal, ACLU. Welcome to the committee, Kendall.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson, members of the committee. Kendall Seal, Director of Advocacy for the ACLU of Kansas. Our goal is to preserve and strengthen constitutional liberties of all Kansans, and we oppose Senate Bill 305. We believe Senate Bill 305 is inadequate to protect against constitutional and civil liberty violations, racial profiling, and bias-based policing. The implementation of what's been called ALPR, automatic license plate readers, poses serious privacy and other civil liberty threats. The knowledge that one is subject to constant monitoring can chill the exercise of our cherished right to free speech and association. These databases of license plate reader information create opportunities for institutional abuse, such as using them to identify protest attendees, as was previously discussed. License plate reader systems can also facilitate discriminatory targeting. An agent who manually enters plates in the license plate reader system based on a discriminatory rationale, could check far more plates than he could without the technology, or she could. The other interesting thing, and it was referenced, it's also where these fixed readers are located, which neighborhoods, which groups are they targeting to constantly monitor who's coming and who's going. That could be based on a religious, ethnic, or associational makeup. And finally, this bill is void of meaningful oversight, accountability, and transparency mechanisms. We even heard that some of the exceptions under KORA, specifically where the fixed location of the readers would be placed, was an attempt to make it exempt. And we think that is kind of moving in the wrong direction. We should be working to make more police data available under KORA and not the other way around. The police must have reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred before examining collected license plate reader data. They must not examine license plate reader data in order to generate reasonable suspicion. It shouldn't operate in the opposite direction. Finally, the retention timeframe proposed in this, it should be measured in days or weeks, not months, and certainly not years, as is currently drafted. This bill doesn't sufficiently capture those recommendations, and therefore we oppose it. Thank you.
Committee questions for Kendall. Senator Pittman.
Thanks for coming and thanks for testifying. And I agree that our civil rights should be protected. But let's take the counter argument that just for a second. If we have no law and this is occurring, would you agree that that's also a bad situation if police, let's say in this example, are out already capturing this data, and there are no rules and standards around it? That's surely not a better situation. That's the situation we're in now. This puts some structure on that, but I think what you're saying is it's not the proper structure, and maybe you don't think they should, or maybe ACLU doesn't think they should be capturing that data anyhow. I mean, there's about 3 questions in there, but maybe you could respond to that.
Certainly, I think the lack of clarity, particularly, right, like when there's a void of structure or process, that can be kind of a dangerous proposition, especially related to data security. To the first part of that question, certainly we think that, a rushed kind of solution in this space is probably less than desirable in terms of setting up precedent and potentially opening up Kansans to even further surveillance, which I know is not the intended purpose of the bill's drafters and what the concepts why it was brought forward in the manner it was.
Committee, further questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You heard Officer Slaughter talk about a potential piece of the legislation that was left out that could be an amendment that, and I'm just looking at your testimony now, that potentially deals with protests or lawful gatherings of people. What's your thought about that? Do you think that potentially, if it were added to the bill, would address some of your major concerns that you mentioned today?
Yes, Senator Hawk, I think looking at that language to see, I think sometimes in these conversations when we talk about protests or even we talk about gangs, sometimes the definitions of those words can be applied to lots of different groups that we may not think of as gangs historically or protest groups historically. And so I think it's important that it's crafted, and the suggestion that you have, I think, is a welcome one.
Thank you. And a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for coming, Kendall, in person. After what Senator Hawk just said and your comments before that, does that bring you to neutral on this bill then? Recognizing there is a problem now that we should be addressing sooner than later?
Right. I think there's several areas. I think that's one area. I think when we look at the retention period, I think it shouldn't be for years. I think it should be much shorter in time frame. Specifically the KORA exception, I think it is the wrong direction to think that, not knowing where these fixed trackers are located in the community should somehow be exempt under KORA. I think communities should know if they're under constant surveillance.
So neutral then with a few tweaks?
There would need to be some substantial tweaks to this current proposal. Thank you. Yeah.
So you would want the human traffickers to be able to find the location of where these deals are and then avoid the license plate readers?
Certainly, we would not support human traffickers locating victims. Actually, that's one area I actually teach on in law school. I teach on trafficking in the law. So I'm certainly well aware of how trafficking operates and how law enforcement handles those investigations. And that's not what the ACLU is proposing here. We're concerned about just everyday Kansans being under constant surveillance with these readers.
So you're not opposing just to exempt from open records the fixed locations of these readers?
We think that there should be more information available under CORA, and we think that the exemptions as currently drafted in this proposal are inappropriate.
Further, Senator Pyle.
Listening to both sides of this, there is always that question, and I'm not sure I can articulate this well enough, but I'm going to try. There's always that question of what amount of freedom are you willing to surrender to gain some kind of protections? And I think he makes a valid point, and the chairman makes a valid point. Yeah, you bring in the trafficking part, but at the same time, the public has a right to operate freely, not have big government looking over their shoulder all the time, surveilling them. And so we've got to find a balance to that. And Mr. Chairman, I was wondering, since this seems to be expedited and rushed, have these folks had an opportunity to sit down together and try to work out these differences? Has that occurred yet, Mr. Chairman?
I do not know. I assume that it has not lately. We may want to hold off working this bill till Tuesday and request special permission to let the folks talk about it a little bit. I do know that there has been some issues that are going on right now. There's license plate readers out there right now as we speak. And my concern is getting some protection around that data, making sure it's encrypted, making sure the locations aren't disclosed. These people that are into this human trafficking, these drug trafficking, they're sophisticated. They will use open records request.
And the bill needs to specify that that's what the only use is for. And it's not to, that's something they're going to have to work out. And I, for one, believe they ought to at least come up with as much as they can compromise on the bill, each party, and figure out what needs to be fixed in the bill from the ACLU standpoint and before we move forward on this. And I'm not opposed to what you suggested on Tuesday or Wednesday, but and we'll be back here even later. The way things work around here, we could do something in veto session.
We are a non-exempt committee, and so we do have to get special permission to meet.
That's right. But
I think we can.
Well, considering this is a Wichita thing, I would think that it would be possible to do, Mr. Chairman. Did you get all that, Gary? Thank you.
It's more than just Wichita, but Wichita happens to be the one promoting this to protect your data. Further questions for Mr. Seal? Senator Hawk, one quick question. We still have 100 to work.
I don't even want an answer. I'd just like to know if there are other states and staff or you could provide us if there's other examples of legislation similar to this. So you don't have to answer it, but if you know of it, I'd like that. Thank you. Thank you.
And that would go for any of the conferees. If you know of other states' laws that have some, you could email us samples. That would be appreciated. Thank you. Email it to Florence, and she can distribute it to the entire committee. That it, no further question. We'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 305. Committee, looks like we will not work this today. We'll request special permission to meet on Tuesday. I'd like to turn our attention back to Senate Bill 100. It's a driver's license bill that was brought to us by several people. You've seen several different amendments and things. Senator Fascadeau was the driving force behind this for years. I believe there is one part that has been agreed to, but Adam, could you refresh us what Senate Bill 100 is?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 100 would provide for exclusion from the additional 90-day period for suspended or revoked licenses for individuals who have were unable or who were did not either pay or take care of their underlying traffic citation. It also dealt with eligibility for restricted driving privileges, There were amendments added on that provide for payment plans and waiver of fines. It also, certain contact information would be required on a traffic citation. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adams? Committee, you know, we passed this bill out with an amendment. Thought it was agreed upon language by all the parties, but then when it got printed and it went to the floor, we found out that was not the case in the least. The courts had serious issues with it, and as people worked on amendments, as they would change one thing, think they'd address the issues, it would cause another issue. But I do believe that there is now an agreement on a portion of the bill, which was Section 2 of the original bill. And it would be my desire to take the piece that we have in agreements on it, gut this bill, and put that section in it. With that, I have prepared an amendment. Senator Fascadeau has worked on this for a long time, and this amendment leaves Section 2, I'll be explaining while we're doing it, which is a portion that says it removes the 90 days suspension if the only reason you were suspended for was because of economic reasons and you got caught with one the first time for driving while suspended. Removes the additional 90 days of suspension so they can get a restricted license, be out there driving with insurance again. Senator Hawk.
Are some of the other parts in another bill?
Yes, we placed two of the other parts in Senate Bill 127. It's made it through a lot of the process, and I believe they've even amended another piece in that was agreed upon in that. But this piece has not made it through the process yet. And I thought it's a valuable piece for these people who have had economic hardships and haven't been able to get their tickets paid. We heard testimony. There was one lady who was driving her daughter to the hospital, and she got pulled over. She knew she was driving with a suspended license, but she got another 90 days added on immediately and another $100 fine. That's pretty much the sum of this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly willing to second an amendment or vote on this when appropriate.
I would question for Senator Dietrich.
Could you just explain the process now, because this is in Senate Bill 127. What's the process?
This is not in Senate Bill 127. This is in Senate Bill 100. It was before the Senate. We made major amendments to it. The courts choked on it. The clerks had issues that mechanically and financially would not work. They've worked together. All the parties worked. I've had more amendments on this than you can expect from. They were calling me Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday trying to get together. They're going to continue working on this. It's probably not the last, but the piece that is agreed upon is Section 2. So I thought, let's get the agreed upon piece moving forward so we can help some of our citizens a little bit.
So you had mentioned Senate Bill 127. That's why I asked that question. Maybe I misunderstood it.
Senate Bill 127 is over in the House, and it's passed and it's going forward.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I missed that part. Thank you.
My intention is to basically get Senate Bill 100 and just leave Section 2, not as it was amended, but just as it was originally introduced. That's what this amendment does. We probably ought to create a substitute bill. I'll consider that a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Hawk. Committee, what's your pleasure? We have all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Committee, we had one other bill on the motor graders. Yes. We just amended it. Let's make sure. I'll make the motion that the substitute bill, Senate Bill 100, be passed out, favorable for passage. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Bill's on its way. Committee, we had the municipal road grader bill, exempting the operators from it. What's your pleasure on that? That's $22.95.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee recommend House Bill 2295 favorably for passage.
Seconded by Senator Pyle. Further discussion, Senator Hawk.
Do we think this might be a consent calendar bill that might help get it through the process?
Let's see, 3 days. It's simple enough. We could try that.
So moved.
We have a substitute motion to make it the same thing on the consent calendar. Is that good with the second? All those in favor of moving the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That one's on its way to the consent calendar. Committee Tuesday, we will try and meet on Tuesday. We will be looking at working 2245 and Senate Bill 305. With that, we are adjourned.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question? Were you wanting to work House Bill 2247, the highway renaming bill, with?
Yes, I was.
I know I have a couple amendments, but also Senator Reichman's bill is 2247. Do you want to do that Tuesday, or do you want to try to do that real quick?
We can try and do it real quick.
I know what I need to do, so if, just give me 1 minute. So
I think we pretty much have an explanation on this, Adam. The 2247 was the bridge naming and highway naming bills. We recently heard this on 323.
So are you ready for amendments on 2247? And Florence has those. Two here, we're capturing, there's 2 of them. Yes, Florence, we're capturing 2 highway bills that we've already done, just one at a time. Okay. Okay. So in the interest of saving time, I'll make one motion with both of these amendments. The first one was Senate Bill, it's the Bedburg Memorial Highway. We would like to insert that into 2247. And then Senate Bill 19, which was the Marshall County veteran or soldiers bill that we passed out unanimous off the Senate floor as well. And I'm pretty sure Bedburg's was unanimous. So I'll make that motion to insert both of those bills that we've already heard into 2247.
Oh, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? It's amended. Do we have a motion to move this bill out favorably as amended? It's moved by Senator Hawk, seconded by Senator Clays. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. And Senator Bowers, would you mind carrying this bill on the floor?
I would love to carry this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.